How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who I am? Every head in Spago snapped toward my table. And before I could shape a word, the woman in the white Chanel dress hauled off and slapped me, the crack of it ricocheting off glass and marble like a starter pistol. And I remember thinking, yeah, that happened. Because sometimes your brain files shock as humor just to keep you upright. Let me back up a sec. October 15th, Beverly Hills. That honeyed hour when the sun turns storefronts into champagne. I'd pulled on a simple navy dress because I liked feeling like myself, not a mannequin, and my husband Adrian, 6'2", green eyes. The kind of quiet that fills a room. Called out from the bathroom about our reservation, and I could hear the smile in his voice, and I could hear the worry too. The one where he wants me armored in couture so strangers behave. You know what I mean? And I told him I was fine, and he said I was perfect. And we rode to Spago with the windows up and a playlist low and the kind of love that makes you forget the world can be ugly. Inside, the maitre d' knew his name, of course. That happens when you run a company worth more money than most zip codes. But we took the same corner table we always do, and I took the water, and he took a call. Tokyo. Time zones don't care about date night. And I said go, I'll be right here. And that is exactly what I was doing when the perfume hit first, citrus over steel, and then the voice. Bright with politeness like a blade is bright with polish. Excuse me, she said, looking at me the way people look at luggage that isn't theirs. I think there's been a mistake. People like you don't sit at these tables. And I felt the floor tilt a degree, not because this was new. I grew up in Detroit. I know the choreography of rooms that decide for you, but because the whole dining room leaned in as if we were a play they'd paid extra to see from the front row. I said my husband would be right back. She laughed like crystal breaking and did the slow tour with her eyes. Target dress, Payless shoes, right? And gave me a speech about standards and zip codes and what things cost. And the part of me that has weathered 1,000 small cuts stood up inside me and said no. And I said it out loud, evenly, that I would not be leaving. And that's when she asked me if I knew who she was, and I said I didn't. And that's when she decided her hand could do what her words hadn't. The slap landed, my cheek went hot, my ears sang. Forks froze midair, and for a second the city's most careful room held its breath like it might pass out. And she said there, as if physics were now on her side. As if humiliation could make a person disappear. You hit me. I said to name the thing out where everyone could see it. And she said she was defending herself. And she told the crowd of people who had watched her approach me, that I had been aggressive, that I had threatened her. And some faces did the math counts against truth that money can do to your brain. But then a new voice cut across the linen. She was polite, said an older man by the window, silver hair, calm eyes. The kind of presence that makes you feel like someone has finally opened a window. I saw the whole thing. And you could feel the spell break in little pops around the room. But the woman, Patricia, she'd finally announced, like a verdict, kept coming, insisting I didn't belong, insisting the manager remove me, and the manager, poor man, tried to ask if I'd let him seat me elsewhere. Like my problem was geography rather than harm. I stood up, legs a little ship at sea, but spine steady, and said what it was, racism and assault. And the word racism electrified the air as if I'd stuck a fork into an outlet. And just then everything stopped for a different reason, because Adrian was back, moving toward me with a face I'd never seen on him in public, something fierce and very still. Did you just put your hands on my wife? He said, soft enough to carry to the last banquet. And the room had its second gasp of the night, because people love a twist, and this one had zero subtlety. The woman had slapped the wife of a billionaire she knew by name, but not by eyes. And you could hear phones unlock. You could practically hear Google whisper back his net worth. Patricia blanched. I didn't know, she said, and Adrian said that's the point, isn't it? You didn't think you needed to, and the manager tried to make it better with the kind of apology that has a price tag attached, and Adrian asked him why respect was contingent on recognition. And I could feel his anger like a current running through his hand where it found my shoulder. Protective, yes, but also hurt on my behalf in a way that made me both grateful and tired to my bones. I told the room what happened, simple, straight, no adjectives, and the older man, Mr. Klein. He would later introduce himself, nodded along like a witness sworn in, and for a minute Patricia softened, mascara slipping. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean. And I wanted to believe that the mirror had done its job, that seeing herself would be enough. Then her phone lit the table, and something hardened back into place. And she looked not at me, but at the crowd. And you could watch the calculation bloom. If contrition can't save you, contempt often tries. And she called me a liar, a gold digger. Said the coffee shop where we met was a setup. Said my modest choices were a con because what kind of woman who loves the poor marries a man who owns a jet? And if you've ever had someone weaponize your private doubts, you know how quickly the floor can drop 3 more inches. You know what I mean. Adrian told her to stop, and I told him to let her finish. Because I wanted every word on the record of that room. And when she finally ran out of poison, the quiet that followed was different, heavier. Not the hush of shock, but the sound a heart makes when it decides whether to keep trusting. I looked at my husband and saw it. The search, not for truth, he knew that, but for the right thing to say to keep me from going under. And it hit me that love can drown while you're still standing together if you're forever trying to prove it to strangers. So I told him I was tired, not of us, but of the fight, the costume, the rooms that demand explanations before they offer chairs, and that's when Mr. Klein stood again and said he'd been married 53 years and that the trick wasn't belonging to each other's worlds. It was building one, brick by messy brick. That belonged to both. Something broke open in me then. Not a crack from damage, but the seam of a seed making room for a sprout. And I said I'd choose us, out loud, where 100 people could hear it. And watch this. It's funny. Spago applauded, small and sincere, and Adrian let out a breath he'd been holding since childhood, and pulled me in and said we'd figure it out together. Now, consequences. Everyone in that room had been waiting for that word to show up in the narrative like the cavalry, and it did. The manager's apology grew a spine. Adrian's security detail materialized like shadows with earpieces, and Patricia tried to bargain with the future she'd put at risk, my husband, my children, my standing. And Adrian told her the volunteer work I'd asked for a minute earlier was no longer on the table, because repentance isn't a performance you cancel when the audience looks away. She was escorted out. Faces turned, not in triumph, but in that stunned after feeling you get when the truth insists on being seen, and a handful of diners, Mr. and Mrs. Klein leading, gave us their names for statements. And we could have left right then, taken the soft night home, but I looked at my half-melted butter and said, we came here to have dinner, and I'm not letting a stranger decide how this night ends. We finished our meal. The kitchen sent kindness on plates. The staff moved like a quiet shield, and the room slowly remembered how to breathe. And Adrian held my hand on the table instead of under it, because sometimes you plant a flag just by not hiding. And when the check came, the manager tried again, with free desserts and open invitations, and Adrian said, thank you. We'll be back when the policy is respect before recognition. On the ride home, the city pulsed, that electric California gold. And I thought about Detroit bus stops and coffee counters, and every door I've ever walked through, wondering if someone would ask for my permission slip for humanity. And I decided I'm done writing permission slips for people who will never read them in good faith. And I decided, this is the part that matters, that I'm also done letting anger be the only color in my memory of the night, because there was love at that table too, and a stranger who stood up, in a room that learned something it didn't expect to learn on a Tuesday. What happened to Patricia after? Lawyers called, statements were filed. A judge's calendar made space. Justice has its own tempo. It doesn't care about cliffhangers. And maybe you think losing contracts or facing charges is too much. Maybe you think it's not enough. Maybe you're wondering if punishment changes a heart or if only service does. And that's the conversation worth having. As for us, 3 months from now, we might be eating at the same table. Or we might decide there's a better one at a hole in the wall where the bread is loud and nobody cares about labels. And maybe Patricia will be reading to second graders on a fluorescent morning, stumbling over the courage it takes to start over, and maybe she won't. Open endings are honest like that. I'll leave you with this image because it's the one I keep. The room has mostly emptied. The jazz has found its pulse again. The candles do that small brave flicker, and Adrian is studying the fading mark on my cheek as if he could erase the last hour with his thumbs. And I tell him I'm okay, and he says I know, but that's not the point, and we laugh, quietly. Because sometimes choosing joy on purpose is the most defiant thing you can do.